And welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. We're going to get things started with our special guest today, Professor Mohammad Marandi. You have seen him on the show before. He's a professor at the University of Tehran. We have a lot to get into. Welcome back, Professor Marandi.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Sabrina. It's always a pleasure, always an honor.
All right, so I guess I want to get started with what has happened with the activists that were a part of the Samud flotilla. I know you've been watching this as well as the rest of us. For those who are not aware, over 400 activists have been kidnapped by Israel. They are being tortured from what some of the activists who have been released are saying. They are obviously held against their will. And I do want to show you one of the videos that came out here. In fact, Professor Marandi, I believe, you shared this one about what the IDF has been doing to Greta Thunberg. Everyone listen to this.
Hepsi siyasetçisi, hepsi bize böyle böcek muamelesi yapmaya kalktılar ama herkese böyle davranıyorlar. Greta'ya çok ağır işkence yaptılar. Evet, Greta'ya zulmettiler. Küçücük çocuk da Greta. Onu süründürdüler, İsrail bayrağını öptürdüler. Yani Naziler ne yaptıysa aynısını yaptılar.
Yeah, so it's not in English, so I'll tell you guys what he said. Basically, what he was saying is that they grabbed Greta Thunberg by her hair and dragged her. So he saw this in front of his face. He said he witnessed it firsthand. That is one of the activists there that spoke out. And here's another one here that I want to bring in as well.
Greta Thunberg, a brave woman who is only 22 years old. She was humiliated and wrapped in an Israeli flag and exhibited like a trophy. I had the feeling of being in a really barbaric place, and I really hope that that this barbarism might be over soon. First, we were kidnapped in international waters. Then they took us to land, and once on land, they behaved like a terrorist group. People were kicked. We were left without fresh water for over 2 days. Overall, they took every opportunity to humiliate any of us. We were treated like terrorists because they thought we were terrorists. So I was unlucky enough to get out just while Ben-Gvir was coming. And so the police used very, very tight handcuff on us that stopped our circulation. They blindfolded us and they put us in a van with barely any clothes and with very, very low temperature. So high conditioning that was like freezing. And they kept us there for probably 3 hours.
Yeah, so this is torture. That gentleman there was an Italian journalist. He also added to the Greta story and said that they wrapped her in an Israeli flag, that they humiliated her in front of everyone. Professor Marandi, I want to get your perspective about this, all these activists that have been kidnapped by Israel.
First of all, we have to keep in mind that they were, as he pointed out, abducted in international waters. But also, once if they were able to enter Gazan waters, under international law, even under international law accepted by the West, accepted by the Europeans and the North Americans, Gaza is independent of the Israeli regime, and the Israeli regime is not supposed to be in Gaza or the West Bank. And so they should be able to freely enter Gaza, and once leaving international waters, that does not mean that they would have been entering so-called Israeli territory. Now, of course, many of us don't believe in the legitimacy of the Israeli regime in the first place. We don't accept apartheid. We all believe that the South African model is the legitimate model where everyone has to be treated as equal human beings across the land. But even if we were to accept the Western model, the official Western model, not the unofficial one, the unofficial Western model is to support the Greater Israel. But the official Western model is to preserve a supremacist regime within the 1967 borders, and then return the West Bank and the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian people, and that makes the Israeli occupation in both these areas completely illegal. So what these people were doing was legal, and in any case, they were in international waters. But I think this was a huge mistake by the regime because the flotilla, now people had differing views of the flotilla, and I don't like getting involved in these debates. But one of the strengths was that it had people from across the world, and also it brought about uh, activism, or it strengthened activism across the Mediterranean. Because as these boats were going from port to port, people on different islands and in different countries, they would come to see them off, or they would come to welcome them. And that enhanced this sense of solidarity. So I think the fact that the Israeli regime prevented infant formula from getting to the people of Gaza was expected. But the awareness that the flotilla helped create, through the very fact that people from over the world were a part of it. So when they're arrested, people across the world recognize that people from their country, from their region, from their continent were involved, and they're being tortured or they're being mistreated. And this only makes the situation worse for the Israeli regime, especially at a time when the regime is silencing critics, it's imposing restrictions on free speech, and it is taking over TikTok and other Western and other media controlled by the United States or elements within the United States. So I think this was a catastrophic move by the Israeli regime. They could have done it differently, but being a racist, supremacist regime, they don't understand how bad things are for them now. And I'm quite surprised, actually, because, I mean, in general, I've been surprised for a very long time now, because I always thought that the Zionist regime and its supporters across Europe and North America, that they were the best when it came to propaganda. But I'm coming to believe that they were always very overrated, and that they are pretty incompetent, very foolish, of course, barbaric and inhumane, as the gentleman in the clip rightly pointed out. But they are doing a terrible job.
Yeah, I also want to remind people there are Americans there that are detained as well. And I'm sure you're aware of this as well, Professor Marandi. I haven't seen one. Well, nope, I take that back. Earlier this morning, I did see a message from Congress member Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna did make the call that something needs to be done. People need to, he was naming the fact that there are Americans there that are kidnapped. So he's the only one I've seen so far. I tagged Ayanna Pressley, Elizabeth Warren, and Ed Markey, that there are two brothers from Massachusetts that are, from what I understand, related to Ralph Nader, that are also were kidnapped by Israel. Silence. Nothing but crickets. All of these politicians, with the exception of Ro Khanna, are very, very quiet. And just imagine if it were the other way around, right? Like, I mean, it's Americans that were detained by Israel. Imagine if those Americans were kidnapped by like China or Russia, for example. You see the difference? It's just like they continue to give Israel a pass. But I agree with you that I think this flotilla, in my opinion, is getting even more attention. I talked to, some friends of mine who have not been just politically set. They're not into politics, and they're not just really paying attention to the news. They try to tune all of that out. But they even found out about this one. So it has received a lot of attention. What do you think about the activists that came from Turkey? Like, after those ships were detained by Israel, there were activists from Turkey that I think sent out like at least 40, a little over 40 boats to go out there as well. What do you think? What message does that send?
It shows that the people of Turkey, or Turkey, are very different from the government. The government is complicit in this genocide. It's been working with the Israeli regime for the last 2 years. It continues to transport cheap fuel from Baku to Israel to fuel the genocide. It until recently, Turkish Airways or Turkish there were direct flights, and they do trade. Ships go back and forth, and apparently Mr. Erdogan's relatives are involved in the trade between the two regimes. But this shows that ordinary Turks are completely with the Palestinians. Now, the Turkish government pretended to be with supporting the flotilla, like a couple of European countries. They sent a ship and a drone, but they pulled away alongside the Italians and didn't do anything about what the Israelis, in order to protect the flotilla. So, it just shows the gap between the regime and the people, but it also shows how the public across the world is becoming increasingly uh, angry, and direct action is becoming something that governments are increasingly worried about. In Morocco, for example, we're seeing unrest, and the people are going to the streets in outrage, but also because of local grievances. The more indifference we see from these regimes, whether it's Turkey or Egypt or Jordan or Saudi Arabia or the Emirates or whoever, the more angry their people become. I was on a program a while back, and the host, he was in the Emirates. And I told him, look, where you are, people are not allowed to express their views on Palestine. And he admitted that that's true. So as the situation continues to deteriorate, these governments become increasingly less legitimate in the eyes of their own people. So just as the United States and the Europeans, the elites have lost the public, and public opinion has turned against them and their Zionist allies, the same is happening in this part of the world. And that's not good for the United States, because the governments are mostly proxies of the United States. And just one other thing that I'd like to add, Sabrina, and that is that, you're speaking about Americans from your town, from your city, from your part of the United States. We had a Lebanese family that was massacred, I think, less than 2 weeks ago in Lebanon, and in southern Lebanon, a Lebanese American family, 4 kids and 2 parents. And the father and 3 of the kids were killed. The mother survived, and I think one of the children who was badly wounded. Hopefully that child survived. So 3 American-born kids were murdered, children, small kids, and the father, who was also American Lebanese. But there was no protest by the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon, or in Tel Aviv, or Al-Quds in Palestine, nor the State Department. No one protested. Completely indifferent to the murder of 3 American children, passport holders, to American man, a passport holder. They were completely indifferent. That is how it is. The United States does not care. The United States government does not care about its citizens. It cares about the Israeli regime. It does not care about children. It obviously doesn't care about Palestinian children, but it does not care about children from families that are not firmly in the camp of the Zionist regime.
Yeah, it's true. They show us also here in America every day how much they apparently care about us. One of the things I wanted to get your perspective about this Gaza peace plan from Donald Trump, which I said a day or 2 ago that this isn't a real peace plan. What do you think happened here, Professor Marandi? Israel seems to be very upset that Donald Trump said, stop the bombing. I saw a video earlier today from Marco Rubio also saying, stop the bombing, to exchange the hostages, etc. And there were multiple Israeli outlets that all of a sudden started putting Donald Trump's face on Hamas, started to say that Donald Trump is Hamas. It's just really, really crazy, considering that was exactly what was laid out in that peace plan that Benjamin Netanyahu agreed to at that point in time at the press conference in front of everyone. The fact that Israel will agree to something publicly, and they've done this like since October 7th, obviously, and then behind the scenes they do what they want to do anyway. What do you think is going to happen with this hostage deal that is coming up? Because I personally don't foresee Israel stopping the bombing, and I also don't foresee Israel leaving Gaza, even though there was something in the deal about that they would exit and not occupy, and that they would not annex the West Bank. What do you think is going to happen here? And what do you think Trump's play is? Is he just trying to sort this out very quickly in such a way so he can put his focus on Iran? Because that's what some of us are wondering.
Well, it's impossible really for me to say what's going on in the mind of Trump. I don't think anyone really knows. When you watch his speeches, it's sometimes it's just too embarrassing to watch. I mean, even though I dislike him, but when he was speaking in front of the generals, I just couldn't watch. Or when he was speaking at the UN, I felt embarrassed, even though he has nothing to do with me, and I don't support him. But it was just, I was wondering, like, what's wrong with this person? So I don't know what the real reasons are. There could be a multiple reasons. One is that Trump admitted apparently that that Israel is now unpopular, that it has been isolated across the world. And this is a big deal. The Israeli regime is hated everywhere. I look at the Charlie Kirk issue. I don't know what happened to him. Obviously, the FBI narrative has fallen apart. But the very fact that from the very start people were suspicious of the Israeli regime shows how evil the regime has become in the eyes of even ordinary Americans. People across the world expect this sort of thing from the regime, even if it's in the United States, even if it's against someone who's supported them so much in the past. Now, again, I don't know what happened to him. I don't believe the official narrative, at least from what I've seen so far, the evidence presented and the critiques that have been provided. But I have no idea, what really happened. But that's not the point. For me, the point is, why is it that it is so believable for people that the regime carried it out? Because that's the natural behavior of the regime. That's how it behaves. And so it has become despised across the world. And I think that there are people in the United States and among Zionists who think that Netanyahu is his method of rule and his genocidal, openly genocidal behavior is destroying Israel. I think he is destroying Israel. I believe that Israel is dead. I don't think it's going to last many more years. It has been delegitimized in the eyes of the world. It is despised. It has shown itself to be far weaker than it presents itself. It hasn't even been able to take Gaza after 2 years. It hasn't defeated Ansarullah. Hezbollah is still armed and it's preparing itself. It lost against Iran. It's not. I mean, they won in Syria, the CIA dirty war that began in 2011. It succeeded, but beyond that, they have had no real victories. So the delegitimization of the Israeli regime in the eyes of the world is big, and I think there are people in the United States who are among Western elites that are worried. That could be one reason why they want to see this stop. Not because they care about the Palestinian people. No, they don't care about the Palestinians. They don't care about Palestinian kids. They don't care about Palestinian women at all. At all. It's not important for them. But they are upset that it is very important for the rest of us, and that people across the world are mobilized. The flotilla is one example. Some people criticize the flotilla. Some people think it was a great idea. I don't like getting into these arguments, but what is important is that the flotilla shows how broad the support for the Palestinian people is, and how much effort has gone into this move, where hundreds of people literally put their lives at risk to make a point, to send the world a message. This is very different from what we had in the past. When I was young, Palestinian supporters were very small in number. And even in alternative media, it was just one of many issues. because many thought that there was no hope, I suppose, and many just there was no awareness. Now everyone knows what's happening, and even the fact that they're shutting down TikTok and they're shutting down mainstream media, even though mainstream media was always biased, but that itself is making it worse for the regime, because the regime is seen as not only carrying out genocide with U.S. support and Western support in Palestine, but also it's impacting people's lives in the United States itself. People are not allowed to speak anymore. People are not allowed to see what they want on social media. So what's going on in Palestine is having a direct effect on people's lives in the United States and how they can conduct themselves. So that may be one issue. I also, maybe, I'm just guessing, someone could say that Trump maybe was hoping that the Palestinians would capitulate, and after making this threat. I don't buy that. If that is the case, the Palestinians did not capitulate. The Hamas response was very well crafted, and it basically rejected foreign rule over Palestine, and it opened the door to negotiations. But if you look at what Trump himself posted, the Hamas text, which was supported by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the other resistance groups, if you look at that text and compare it to Trump's threats, you'll see that effectively Trump backed down. Now, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, or next month, but it does show that Trump is not as powerful as he pretends he is, and that the Palestinians are not intimidated in the way in which Trump would have hoped. So the Palestinians are playing a very sophisticated game. They've written a very good response. The Israelis, of course, are being foolish, and we don't know what Trump is going to do tomorrow.
Right. This is true. This is true. I would also say Israel making these efforts to basically, swarm social media by paying American influencers. To me, my response to that is that it's too late. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Like, we already saw everything that we needed to see. So paying all these influencers to get them to flood TikTok and YouTube and X also, it doesn't make any sense at this point. People already know what's real and what we saw in the images that we have seen. So it's just, it's bizarre to me that they even think that that would work. But I want to pivot to Iran for just a second, because many of us are starting to pay attention to the fact that it has already been predicted by some of the members of the Likud party that Israel is going to attack Iran before the end of this year. And this is where I think a lot of the focus is going to go to. And part of me wonders if Donald Trump is just like, we got to wrap up this Gaza situation and we can focus on Iran. I feel like that's where a lot of the focus and the energy is going to go towards, especially since I saw this article the other day. Breaking news: China state media announced that China is transferring 10 of its J-10 fighter jets from Pakistan to Iran. I wanted to get your take about that, because first of all, I did check to see if this existed. Sometimes these things on X, people post stuff and there's no article attached to it. But I did check that, and there were articles about that. How do you feel about this? I have a poll question there in the live chat if people would answer that. I do think that Israel is going to put more of their focus on Iran. And I think that Donald Trump and Marco Rubio are going to put their efforts in that direction. But this response here from China sending, transferring jets to Iran, are we headed towards World War III?
Well, obviously, the focus is always going to be on Iran, because the West knows that the power that supports the resistance in Palestine and elsewhere lies in Iran. The heroism of the Palestinian people, the Lebanese people, the Yemeni people is extraordinary. But at the end of the day, it's Iranian support, logistical support, Iran supports Gaza through tunnels. They've been fighting for 2 years. They're building new tunnels. They're building new capabilities all the time. That needs help. You cannot be self-sufficient in a 2-year war against a genocidal regime in a small place like Gaza, which is surrounded. So the Iranians, just as in the past, they helped them create these defense capabilities. They're continuing to do so. And Yemen, of course, being the other country that is supporting the Palestinian people, they too obviously are getting help from Iran, even though they have their own brilliant engineers who are working to produce missiles and capabilities to support the Palestinian people. But obviously, the Iranians are helping them, and so is Hezbollah, and all of these resistance groups are helping each other. So it's understandable that the United States would want to target Iran because the Iranians are the only the Iranian leaders and the Iranian people are. It's the only country which truly supports Palestine. The rest are just for show. Of course, Yemen is also truly supporting the Palestinian people, but they too need Iran support. So I don't find it strange that the Americans and the Israelis would like to take out what the head of the snake, as they like to call us, or the whatever sinister term they make up for Iran. But the first war that they carried out against Iran, which was a blitzkrieg attack, and the Americans, while they were negotiating with Iran, they were secretly being deceptive and preparing for an attack against Iran. The initial strike on Iran was painful, and we had lots of senior officials and scientists and academics who were murdered on day one. But the Iranians quickly regrouped and they defeated the Israeli regime. The best evidence that I often cite is Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, after the ceasefire, said that during the last 3-4 days, the Israeli regime was in deep trouble, and Trump basically saved them by putting proposals to Iran, which Iran initially did not accept. And then after 3-4 days, apparently the Americans gave some concessions, and the Iranians accepted a halt in the hostilities. I would imagine that, the Iranians, without a doubt, they're preparing themselves for another war, possibly a more severe attack would be carried out against Iran by the Israeli regime with U.S. support or with U.S. direct participation. It would be very difficult for the United States to get engaged directly because they would either have to use bases around Iran, and that would make these countries complicit, and Iran will punish them, or they will have to fly from far away, like from Diego Garcia or elsewhere. But of course, they are using bases in Syria. The United States have a very good relationship with Al Qaeda government in Syria, and Al Qaeda, after all, they've gone back to New York after what we were told on 9/11 that they carried out the attack. I don't know, I don't know how they can, how they explain that to the American people that Al Qaeda, which carried out 9/11, was back in New York in September 2025. But in any case, the United States does have bases there that they can use, but it would be very difficult for the Americans to carry out a war against Iran. And Iran is preparing itself since the halt in hostilities. They began to purchase new equipment, build their own equipment. Iran has a very effective military industry. We've seen how Iranian missiles, they go right through U.S. and Israeli and European defenses and strike at the heart of Tel Aviv and other cities. So the Iranians are building upon their capabilities. They are looking at their weaknesses, trying to overcome them. They're restructuring, rebuilding, and they're preparing themselves. And I think the chances for another military conflict is significant.
Yeah, I think it could be coming. Gherkin brought up an interesting point here. Iran has the second biggest Jewish community in the Middle East. What do they think about that? But see, Professor Marandi, that just proves my point again that they don't really care about the Jewish people. They don't just like they don't really care about those hostages. They could have had the hostages back long time ago. But it's like, yeah, they're willing to sacrifice their own people for this greater Israel project.
Without a doubt. I mean, when they invaded Iraq, millions of Iraqi Christians left. It was the Iranians who saved the Christian population and the Yazidi population in Iraq. It wasn't the Americans. The Americans were the government, they were supporting ISIS. They were supporting the extremists. Later on, when Iran was and the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces and the Iraqi Armed Forces and Hezbollah and the others were pushing ISIS back and Al Qaeda as well in Syria, then the Americans saw that they were taking territory, so the Americans started getting involved and they turned against ISIS too for a period. But it was their invasion of Iraq and their support of these terror groups in Syria and the spillover effect in Iraq that led to so many Christians leaving the country. They don't care about Christians, just like Palestinian Christians. They don't care about Palestinian Christians. They don't care about the Syrian Christians that are now being murdered by their Al Qaeda allies. They don't care about anyone. As I said, they don't care about American citizens who are murdered by the Israeli regime in southern Lebanon. It's not even in the news. There's no outrage. They don't care about human rights, human values, women's rights, children's rights, anyone's rights. They've gone back to the mid 19th century, the mid 20th century, before before they started talking about human rights and human values and women's rights. They've even gone, I think they've even put aside the civilizing mission, which they, pursued in the 19th century. Now it's just crude barbarism. It's just brutality. Just kill them all. And you have to win and defeat Venezuela and defeat, Iran and defeat the Palestinians and just bomb boats in the Mediterranean and, bomb buildings in Yemen. Remember the signal discussion where I said that, we killed the guy who was entering this apartment built complex and we brought down the building, killing everyone, and everyone was pleased about it. And then it turned out there was no commander there. They just slaughtered families, and everyone in that group and the U.S. political leadership, they were happy about it. And no major newspaper in the United States protested, no media outlet protested. So this has nothing to do with Christians. It has nothing to do with, it doesn't have any, they don't care about Jews. I mean, as one of your viewers rightly pointed out, Iran has a significant Jewish population, the second largest Jewish population in the region. According to the Iranian constitution, Jews have to have an MP, which they do in parliament, and we have synagogues in Tehran. When Max Blumenthal and when Max Blumenthal came here, I think he did a documentary, or he was supposed to do a documentary on Jewish synagogues. I don't know if it's finished or not in Iran. So he went to Esfahan. There are kosher restaurants in Esfahan and in Tehran as well. There are synagogues in Tehran as well. George Galloway, who was recently arrested at the airport for a number of hours, along with his wife, which that's another story. He too visited a synagogue in Tehran. And but that the Western narrative does not take these into consideration. They don't care about Jews if they're not Zionists. They don't care about Christians as long as they're not Zionists. They don't care about children or women, even if they hold American passports. They can all be easily sacrificed as they are. But Iran is, as I said, Iran is preparing itself, and the Iranian people are very united today. I think even in the West, they're beginning to admit that. I've read some articles about how even the Israeli regime miscalculated. They thought that Iran would collapse because they believed their own propaganda. But Iranians are united, and I think that it's quite clear that if they strike again, the Iranians will hit them back very hard. Now, I don't know what sort of weapons are the Iranians are purchasing from China or Russia. But there's no doubt that they'll do whatever they can to prepare themselves for the next phase. But we have to keep in mind that Washington and the Europeans give the Israeli regime everything. I mean, Ukraine can only dream of what Israel gets from the United States and its partners in Europe.
Yeah. The Washington Post, they published this just a couple of days ago. With Iran under pressure, fears grow of new Israeli strikes. The Trump administration sees snapback sanctions as a key pressure tactic. For some U.S. allies, they raise fears of further instability. Now, and here is the president of Iran here. He was displaying a book of Iranians killed by Israeli strikes as he was addressing the UN. That was fairly recent. But now they're talking about a new wave of sanctions, international sanctions, rattling Iranian politics and dragging down an already struggling economy as fears grow among U.S. allies in the region that another round of Israeli airstrikes on the country could be imminent. And Trump feels as though the best way to tackle any of these countries that he takes issue with is the sanctions, right? So like we put sanctions against Russia. Russia's economy is still doing fine. The sanctions haven't crippled Russia's economy as they thought that it would. How would these sanctions impact Iran?
Well, the New York Times engages in propaganda. So when they say it rattles Iranian politics, I don't feel anything is rattled here, but that's the New York Times. What is most interesting, though, Sabrina, is that I thought the Iranian nuclear program, as Trump would keep saying, was obliterated. If it was obliterated, then why are there fears, as they say? They're not fear. I mean, they have no. The West supports any Israeli attack. I mean, when they attacked first time round, the Europeans said that Israel has the right to defend itself. So it attacks Iran, and the West says yes, they have the right to defend themselves. Which, you know, when it's unprovoked, it doesn't. It's nonsense. But still, that's what they say, and it just shows how hypocritical they are. But if the nuclear program is obliterated, then what reason would they have to attack Iran? So obviously, this has nothing to do with you. It never had anything to do with the nuclear program. And this is something that you and I have discussed before. The antagonism towards Iran is not about the nuclear program. It never has been. It's about Iran's support for the Palestinian people. It's the fact that Iran is the only country, along with Yemen, the only government that's willing to pay a price for the Palestinian people and which says that apartheid is illegitimate. Yet, Iran is the only country in this region which says this, but at the same time, it has the second largest, it has preserved the second largest Jewish community, despite the fact that the Americans and the Israeli regime want Iranian Jews to leave the country. They want them to leave. They offer them concessions and give them extra benefits so that they would leave Iran, but they've stayed. And they have an MP. So while Iran does not is protecting its Jewish, and you don't see any police officers in front of synagogues in Iran or in front of, because no one attacks them. They're a part of Iranian society. They're Iranian citizens. So Iran's problem is not anti-Semitism. It's not its nuclear program. It's not human rights. It's not global warming. It's nothing. It's only about the fact that Iran is the only country that, based on principle, is supporting the Palestinian people and is willing to pay a price for supporting the Palestinian people. Of course, alongside Yemen. But no one else will do this. Everyone else is doing business. I mean, it's sad. I mean, if only, for example, the Colombian president was the president of Turkey, or the president of Egypt, or the president of the Emirates, or the leader of Jordan, we'd be in a different situation today. But as things stand, these leaders are all they're proxies of the United States or allies of the United States, and they're completely unwilling. I mean,
Oh, I think your volume cut out for just a second there, Professor Marandi. Professor Marandi, can you hear me?
yes, I can. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
Oh, no worries. I just had one more question for you. I think a lot of people need to know the answers to this. There is this narrative that is floating around and has been floating around since October 7th that Americans are being fooled into thinking that people are starving in Gaza and that babies are being killed, and that is propaganda that is spread by Iran and Qatar, and that Iran and Qatar are paying people to spread this propaganda. One, why do they mention Qatar considering Qatar is an ally of the United States? And then two, where are they getting this from?
Well, Iran is always easy to antagonize, isn't it? We're the axis of evil. We've been evil for 47 years, but it's quite easy to turn people against something by accusing Iran to be somehow involved. Traditionally, nowadays it's becoming increasingly difficult because, interestingly, Iran is becoming so popular. People across the world are looking to Iran. People don't believe the propaganda anymore. Many people, at least. I mean, a lot of people contact me. A lot of young Iranians from families who left the country 40-some years ago. Iranians who don't speak Persian, but they contact me and tell me that they support Iran, although they've been hearing nothing but bad things about the country for since they've been children. Qatar is a different thing altogether. Qatar is a U.S. proxy. There's no doubt about that. If the United States told Qatar to shut down Al Jazeera tomorrow, they'd shut it down tomorrow. But there's a reason why the United States allows Qatar to play this role that it does. And that is that the United States wants Qatar and Turkey to sort of to have some sort of influence over Hamas and resistance forces. And as we saw after the Israeli regime bombed Qatar with U.S. support, there's no doubt that the Americans were a part of the airstrike, because the Israelis would have to fly over territory controlled by the United States to carry out these strikes. And there's an American base very close to the Hamas office in Doha. So there's no doubt that the Americans knew what was going on. It's interesting that Saudi air defenses did nothing. Now, either they didn't know, and that's terrible because they've spent trillions of dollars on weapons from the West to no avail, or they knew and just allowed it to happen, which I doubt is true, but it's possible. But in any case, Qatar hosting Al-Qaeda is with U.S. consent. It was at the request of the United States and the Israeli regime. And we do know that the Qatari money and the money from Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are also invested in Israel through Kushner and through others. Money from Qatar goes to Israel. So Trump once said during his first term that he milks these regimes, and the United States continues to do so. So Qatar is it's in this terrible position where on the one hand it does the bidding of the United States, but on the other hand they're accusing it of working against the Israeli regime. But Trump has praised Qatar. Senior officials and players in U.S. politics have praised Qatar. That is basically nonsense. And by the way, Qatar does have a positive role. I'm not saying that anyone who works, for example, in Al Jazeera is not good. They have good reporters. In Gaza, they have martyrs. But Qatar plays a double game. On the one hand, they helped the Americans bomb Yemen. Qatar and Turkey were both supporting the Saudi and Emirati genocidal war against Yemen for years, until the Saudis and the Emiratis turned against Qatar, and then Qatar shifted away from them, and then Al Jazeera shifted away from the genocidal war. Initially, Al Jazeera was supporting the war against Yemen. And then later on, after the siege on Qatar, it shifted policy. I was actually banned from Qatar after appearing twice on Inside Story to defend Yemen against the Saudis. And then they gave an internal memo saying that, I shouldn't be, or a verbal memo saying that I shouldn't be invited on any of the programs. So for a couple of years, I was no longer on Al Jazeera. So even though there are good people in Al Jazeera and in other media outlets, but it's controlled by a family dictatorship. There are no elections in Qatar. And Qatar is a Wahhabi regime. The biggest mosque in the country is called the Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab Mosque. And that is the ideology of ISIS. That is the ideology of Al Qaeda. So, Qatar, it's very, Sabrina, it's very interesting. Qatar and other U.S. allies have been promoting ISIS and Al Qaeda, and this takfiri ideology, this ideology of Wahhabi and Salafi extremism, with U.S. consent for decades. And so they promote it, and they're used in Syria, they're used in Libya, they're used everywhere. And then Western media says, look at Islam, look how ruthless it is, look how they cut off people's heads. Well, that Islam is American Islam. That's the Islam of Western intelligence agencies, funded by U.S. proxies like Qatar, funded by Turkey, which is Erdogan, which is in NATO, or Saudi Arabia, which is a U.S. proxy. Just the relationship is the relationship between these extremist groups and Islam is in the eyes of mainstream Muslims is that of animosity, because they kill Muslims, they slaughter more Muslims than anyone else. Yet the West funds them, they support them, and then they blame Muslims. They say, look, this is what Muslims do. But the point is that Qatar is key to the funding of these terrorist groups. The guy in Damascus, Jolani Ashara, he was the co-founder of ISIS. Yep. He was the head of Al Qaeda in Syria. And from my understanding, if I can go back to the Wikipedia page and look at 9/11, I think Al Qaeda had something to do with 9/11. I'm not quite sure, but I'll go back to the Wikipedia page and then I'll get back to you. From my understanding, we were told that Al Qaeda had something to do with it. But so of course I'm joking, but the point is that Qatar plays all these different roles. And it can do so because it's allowed to do so.
Interesting. Well said. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sabrina. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Bye.
Bye for now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Professor Marandi. You can see him on a lot of different shows. He appears on Danny Haifong's show. He's been on Piers Morgan to battle back and forth with him. And many, many, many, many more. So if you are not familiar with them, you have been introduced to him now. Definitely check out his work there. I think we have the poll results. Let's take a look at those. Thank you so much. Will Israel-Iran conflict happen again? Who will start it? Okay, 5% say yes, Iran will strike first. 78% say yes, Israel will strike first. 4% say no, it won't happen again. And 12% say I have no idea. All righty. Thank you. Interesting. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.